Well, ladies and gentlemen, on Thursday, the Conservatives are going to win the EU elections, probably, on the basis of what is clearly a lie. They say that they will have a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. The truth is that they will not, unless it is still unratified when they come to power, or, if they do come to power, or, and this is what's significant, unless UKIP forces them to have that referendum. UKIP may well be able to force a referendum, and that is very, very exciting. But first, let's remind ourselves briefly why our relationship with the EU is such a disaster. The UK needs to trade with the whole of the rest of the world. Yes. Even if the EU were flourishing, it would be completely wrong to allow it to prevent us from trading with the USA, with China, India, and indeed the whole of the world. But in fact, the EU is far from flourishing. Think about this. Its share of world output in 1980 was 26%. But its share for 2015 is forecast at just 17%, an appalling drop. Now, partly this is not its own fault. Its birth rate is falling, and the number of workers available to meet the needs of non-workers goes down and down, while in the United States, India, and perhaps also China, it's the other way around. But partly the EU itself is very much to blame because of its interminable regulations and its restrictions on what business can do. But the worst thing of all, by far, in my opinion, is the cost. It is absolutely dreadful. In the UK, we're worried, quite rightly worried, that we're going to have to borrow £175 billion next year, this year, and probably about the same next year. But that borrowing at least won't go on forever. What will, unless we do something about it, go on forever is the inexorable and gigantic cost of our membership. In fact, it's likely to go up and up. If we accept the figures of the Taxpayers Alliance, a highly respected think tank, that cost is about £120 billion a year. That £120 billion means £2,000 for every man, woman, child and baby in this country every year. But with the EU elections coming up, William Hague gave the Daily Telegraph an interview in April. Now nothing could have illustrated better why I shall vote UKIP on Thursday. There was in that interview no commitment to anything. Let's look at it. If there is a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, will Ken Clarke vote against it? William Hague says that he expects, mark you, that he will. Now what kind of language is that? Why doesn't William Hague know how Clarke will vote? Did he and Cameron not ask him that obvious question before they appointed him to the shadow cabinet? When Ken Clarke himself was a backbencher, he was quite specific. Calls for a referendum were, he said, absurd. Take another point. The Conservatives should make it absolutely clear that if elected, they will immediately have a referendum on Lisbon. But what did we find in that interview? William Hague indicated that the Conservatives were likely to attempt to scrap the treaty, possibly by calling a retrospective referendum. Heavens above, those are Weasel words gone mad. A backbench Tory MP came up to me earlier this year and begged me to go on doing what I was doing. 80% of our members are behind you, he said. That the voters do care about Europe a lot, and that they want clear commitments, not a cowardly collection of weasel words. So, in a later interview, in the Times this time, we read that lo and behold, William Hague promised immediate legislation to reject the treaty if it had not yet been ratified by the whole of the EU. Now, it's not hard to work out what caused this wonderful conversion. The 4th of June was looming, the campaign for the EU elections was just about to begin, and the lessons from the polls were at last sinking in. But it's hard to get rid of bad habits. The commitment to a referendum, if Lisbon was not law, was fine. But what about the more likely situation, that Lisbon is already law when they get in, if they do? Back we go, I'm sad to tell you, to the Weasel words. William Hague left open the door to the possibility of the Tories promising a referendum in their general election manifesto, even if the treaty had been ratified by everybody. Well, leaving open a possibility is not that reassuring. This very morning, I don't know if you listened to the Today programme, he again was asked the question, and he again ducked it. Let's face it, the Tories have not the slightest intention of calling a retrospective referendum on Lisbon. They simply hope that the Weasel words which they have used will sound tough so that they may not lose too many votes on the 4th of June. I can't resist one final point about that Daily Telegraph interview. William Hague asked for a protest vote. Well, voting Tory would not be a protest. They are, or anyway they were at that time, miles ahead in the polls. So he must have meant, vote UKIP. Obviously he too will soon be expelled. Welcome to the club, William. Well, I've had a bit of a go at the Tories, so let me make it quite clear. First, I'm not at all bitter, I'm really not, about their decision to expel me. It was quite understandable. And secondly, that I do hope they'll win the general election. But it's entirely in their hands whether they get the support of people like me. All they have to do to benefit both the country and themselves is to give that guarantee of a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, and they will, in my confident opinion, win the general election in a trot. I just don't understand why they don't do it. Let me name, lastly, one final point. It may be said that I am being disloyal to the Conservative Party. My answer to that is quite simple. A person cannot have two masters, and for me, my loyalty is to the country, not to a party.